One of the Psalms, I can't remember which one. Well, the offertory today. The offertory? Which Psalm?
25.
No, well, we did 25, but the offertory. 116, that's what I'm doing today. 116.
Well, let's do 25.
Ah. You're on your own if you want to do 25 because I didn't study it, plus I gave you. I know it's really hard to read, it's tiny, but I thought you'd like to have it, right? So here's all, ooh, it's not 15, it's changed that to 116, that's 116. 115 was last time. I worked so hard to try to get it to fit on the page. You wouldn't believe what I had to do to get this to fit on the page.
You wouldn't know what they had to do to get the King James printed.
Probably.
Throw out chapters.
Throw out whole pieces, right?
Talk about editing.
You can fit the whole Bible on the page if you want. Sure you can.
Well, remember, that's what was brought back.
Well, they didn't have font sizes. What are you going to do?
That's right, font size. Well, next semester, what we're doing is I'm going to continue on with the Psalms class because the pastors decided to continue on with their classes, and so they said, we need an Old Testament. They said, will you continue on with the Psalms class? I said, well, I've been delayed anyway trying to get everything in I wanted. I was gone for 2 weeks. If you didn't notice, I wasn't here. So, sorry, but we were out trying to find weather so we could shoot rockets out at Eglin. But the weather was bad. That's why I don't have a tan, right? I would have had a tan otherwise. We had no sunshine. It was rainy the whole time, and we finally got off a couple of shots, practice shots, or developmental shots. So no warheads, just shooting.
I hope it was outgoing and not incoming.
It worked. But anyway, I decided I'll go ahead and I'll continue this class. And what I'll do is I'll add some Psalms because I was going to complete it with Psalm 150, but what I'll do is add some Psalms in between. We'll just do we'll look at some more aspects, which is really cool because, how many? There's 150 Psalms that we have. And each of them, we tend to look at them as if they're just the Psalms, right? Cohesive. Are they cohesive? No. Each one of them is a very powerful, almost like its own, each one could be their own book. I mean, if we really looked at it, each one is their own work. It's not like Jeremiah or Daniel or Ruth or any of the other books in the Old Testament where the books themselves are cohesive. That it's a whole piece of history or a whole piece of thing. What we have here is we have 120 bits. Yeah, each one is individual, independent. And, that's what we have to look at them as. You can't basically go from, we've seen how some of the Psalms are, right next to another. You have a Psalm that's very ancient and a Psalm that's more, well, I can't say modern, but, in that 1,000-year span that we've talked about for the language and for the period, we're talking about some Psalms that are probably predating that period, or at least have their elements predating, and then some Psalms that are very late, as far late as Malachi, or as late as at least the Babylonian captivity. So, it's pretty interesting. As a matter of fact, today, we're going to look at a Psalm that is radical. This is a radical Psalm. It's in that Hallel. So the Hallel that we're talking about the Hallel. But in the Hallel is the 113th to the 118th. And I'm gonna try to do 118 and 117 together next time. Let's see, next time is the beginning of the new. So I guess I'll do some introduction in case we get some new students or new people in the classroom. But I want to go to the 117th and 118th Psalms. But in this, we've looked at each of these Psalms, and we've seen that, the time, some of them are late, some of them are early. That's within this Hallel. The Hallel. Hallelujah. Hallel. So, pretty wild, huh? Pretty interesting that we have that mixture. This Psalm is a paradox. And you'll find out why. I told you, and I didn't, I should have. I'm so busy in just trying to keep up with what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be doing my taxes, okay? And I've been working on my taxes.
I see how enthusiastic you are on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
So you can always pay more, by the way, if you're a millionaire.
Well, it's not a question of paying more. It's a question of getting the paperwork, right?
They don't care how much as long as the paperwork's done.
That's right. Well, if they think you haven't given enough, then they'll be talking to you, but I always try to get extra, right? It's kind of like, how come, this is my question, how come God wants 10% but the government wants more than 50? I don't get that, but, need to talk to somebody about that.
Because God's the one giving it to you, they're not.
Yeah, is that it?
There's a lot of-
I think God would have something to say about this, but that's all right. Remember what Jesus said about taxes? Who pays the taxes?
Yeah, who's on the coin?
Well, okay, so what belongs to Caesar?
Everything you made.
Only what God gave them.
Nothing.
Everything belongs to God. So it's a paradox. In other words, Jesus was telling him not to pay taxes. But he goes further because Jesus says to Peter, who pays the taxes? The people of the country or foreigners? Foreigners. Whoa, wait a second. I want them to be paying my taxes too. Well, let's work this out. But in any case. Remember that, we've talked before that we're talking about a 1,000-year span, right? And how many words are there for love in the Old Testament? Technically.
Just one.
Technically there are 4, but there are none. There is no word for love in Hebrew, in ancient Hebrew, period, at all. But there are 4 words for love. I didn't dig up the other 2. These are the 2 classical ones that you'll find in the Torah and you find in the early works. The 2 later ones, one of them I told you means the love of a prostitute, and the other one specifically, they're both borrowed words from Assyrian. One means the love of an uncle for his niece. It's basically incestuous. And the other one is homosexual. And both of them come out of the late prophets. So Gomer, Hosea in Gomer, his prostitute wife. Both of those are found in that one. But they're late date borrowed words. In Hebrew itself, there are only 2 words that have been translated, especially in NIV, for love. King James does not translate any word for love in the Old Testament. But the 2 words are ahab and sheshed. Ahab and sheshed. Ahab is human love. And sheshed is God's love. And usually they're translated, this is usually translated kindness. And this is usually translated affection. Well, let's look at the things I gave you them. I put them right here. Ahab, to have affection for, sexual or otherwise. And it's translated beloved, love, like, and friend. And then sheshed, to bow the neck in courtesy to an equal. So sheshed means that if you're walking down the street and the rich guy is walking down the street, and you're the poor guy, the rich guy, when you bow, barach, then the rich guy does. So he shows you a kindness. And literally, in most contexts, sheshed is used as context of God. Matter of fact, it says that, kindness by implication towards God. Piety, you notice that this is a very interesting word, because rarely by opposition it means reproof. And so translated favor, good deeds, kindly, kindness, mercy, merciful kindness, mercy, pity, reproach, wicked thing. And so you say, well, how can I get wicked thing from this? Well, remember, it's contextual in Hebrew, and Hebrew is one of those kind of languages, very euphemistic and very difficult to fully comprehend without a euphemistic context. So anyway, we'll see this word as we get a little deeper. Now, what I want to do, remember that in the Psalms, and I'll review some of this since it's been a little while. What is the basic nature of Hebrew poetry? What makes it poetry? It is intellectual, but remember, what makes English, well, okay, we're being we're talking about in a purely literary sense, but what typically makes Anglo-Saxon poetry Anglo-Saxon poetry?
Meter.
It's meter. It has a glottal stop. What makes Greek poetry Greek poetry? Meter, right? Pentamic, iambic pentameter, etc., etc. What makes generally English poetry English poetry? What makes French poetry French poetry? Meter and rhyme. What makes most English poetry English poetry? Meter and rhyme. What makes Hebrew poetry Hebrew poetry? Parallelism. So we have to have parallelism. We'll always find parallelism, and it is intellectually based, because parallelism assumes what?
You can understand what you're reading?
Well, it assumes that an intellectual basis, an understanding. In other words, the parallelism isn't rhyme, is it? It's not meter. It's intellectually based on what is contained within, for example, and they're not verses, right? The verses were added. But we do find the Hebrew poetry is broken into, they didn't have sentences, right? But they're segments, they're pieces, and we call them verses, but that's just the nature of the way we put them together.
It's
But-
like when they were written originally, were they, like the scrolls, just all strung? Or were they, you said they were broken into segments?
They were all strung together. But they're broken into segments, not on paper. We have broken them into segments, and we hope we're right. But what helps us in breaking the segments of the poetry apart? The parallels. Exactly. So it's really cool. Of any of the writings, this is an interesting thing to think about. Just imagine what the text looks like in a Hebrew Torah. All squished together, right? No spaces. So how difficult is it to make sure you pull the correct words out?
Right.
It gets difficult, doesn't it? Basically what we do is we go back to Masoretic text, and the Masoretes, we hope they're right. They could be wrong. We know they're wrong for some of the vowel constructions. But, we hope they're right. See? So pulling the words out is difficult. Because remember, what are all these? What are the texts? They're mnemonics. See? If we recognize them as mnemonics, there's no problem. Hopefully you have it memorized, right? I haven't memorized them, but that's what you're supposed to do to read them. So, for the original speakers, it's not a problem because they know what it says. For us, it's a problem. And the thing is that, I think I've mentioned this to you. Hebrew was a dead language, just like Latin is a dead language. Anglo-Saxon is a dead language. What do I mean by that? What's a dead language?
No one speaks it, it's not spoken.
It's not a spoken language. In Jesus Christ's time, it was a dead language. What did they use it for in Christ's time? Reading in the synagogues. Yeah, it was just read in the synagogues. No one was creating new documents in Hebrew. See, in the time of Christ. It was a dead language. And the problem with dead languages is what happens to the language.
People forget. You forget the grammar and
Yeah, you forget all the things that fit within the language because, even in English, do you remember the examples? What I should do next time or sometime I should bring examples from Canterbury Tales. Guys, remember reading the Canterbury Tales? If you have an unexpurgated, unchanged Canterbury Tale, boy, you're going to have problems reading that because it is in Middle English. It is in, basically, you have Anglo-Saxon, then you have Middle English, okay? And Middle English and Old English is kind of Anglo-Saxon-esque mixed with the Middle English, but Middle English is something else. And it is nothing like, the pronunciations aren't anything like our pronunciations. Some people have said that Shakespeare was pronounced the way they pronounce in the Appalachians. Can you imagine that? Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Yeah? Not the kind of British that we're used to, right? In fact, some think that American English is closer to the original British English that was used, you know, it's been what's the universities out there, the Oxfordized. You know, the Oxford English has become the language, the pronunciation of English. Because languages change over time. The pronunciation of vowels, the pronunciation of consonants, structures change. And by the way, we know how it changes. Why is that? How do we know how it changes?
Change spelling.
Well, no, not necessarily spelling. We know because almost all languages move from very strong glottals, very strong glottal stops, you know, very strong K's and C's and very strong to more labial sounds. So French is a great example of a language that is very, you know, I don't want to use the word aristocratic, but it's an example of language that has very strong labials, which means, you know, very soft sounds, which indicates that the language has been spoken for a very, very long time. The English in Anglo-Saxon, remember those very strong clicks, and they use even glottal stops in their poetry. But in our English tends to be more melodic. And by the way, we're mixed with French. That's what makes our language the way it is. So languages change because they soften.
So phonics is more advanced.
What's that?
So what's up?
Oh,
It's
what's
more
up?
advanced.
Could be. Depends on how buzzy your Z's are. But remember too, in Hebrew poetry, we have the different types of parallelism. You know, we have synonymous parallelism, the same meaning. We have antithetic parallelism, which means opposite meaning. Synthetic parallelism, put together compounded forms, introverted. Stair-step parallelism, emblematic. I gave you all these things. We talked also about subscriptions. So remember, the subscriptions are what? All added. They were added prior to the Septuagint. So they're late date, but we know they're added late after the Psalms were fully compiled, at least into the 150 that we have that are basic. Also about titles, when I say it's a Psalm of David, what does that mean?
About him or about him.
It could be written by, it could be concerning, because Hebrew doesn't make a designation in its prepositions. So we don't know, you know, specifically where it was written by or of. The Hallels, as far as I know, none of the Hallels have subscriptions, at least not in any of my texts. But, you know, it's important to note that, because obviously the people that put the subscriptions on, many of the subscriptions we believe are placed because of Talmudic understanding. Meaning, it may not necessarily be written by that person, but it's about that person. You remember which psalm was it that really helped us? The one that was about Bathsheba? Do you remember that? The Davidic psalm? That, you know, didn't it really help to know that was a psalm about David and Bathsheba? Because it really helped us to immediately glom onto the understanding of what the psalm was about. And so the subscriptions, I think, are very important to us, especially late-date readers, because we get an understanding of that. We went through the different festivals, and what I need to do, let's see, is I want to get into the 116th Psalm, but I want to really make sure that, you know, over time we'll probably do a little bit more of this in any case, but about when the Hallel is used. So I'll remind you. The Hallel is used in almost all the new moon, all the festivals. Okay, where's my notes on that? Maybe I deleted them. In any case, we have the Hallel used in almost all occasions. It is said during the three major festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. If you remember, Pesach is Passover. The Shavuot is the festival of loaves, and the Sukkot is the festival of booths. And so we're just moving into the Passover right now in that period. That's the time when Christ was put to death, was resurrected in the Passover period. And then we have the next one is the Festival of Loaves. And if you remember, what other important book is read? Remember, what is read before the Hallel on the Festival of Loaves? The bringing of the law. Ruth. fruit. That's really important, and that should be very interesting to all of us. And by the way, the other one, let's see, is the Passover, and then we have the, we call it Pentecost. But the Shavuot happens just before Pentecost. During the minor festivals, the minor means that the festivals are not mentioned in the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, and were instituted later. And so at the beginnings of the new months, then they say the Hallel is used. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you don't say the Hallel at all. And as I mentioned, I'll just repeat this again. This is from the Talmud. Is it seemly for the king to be sitting on his throne of judgment with the books of life and death open before him, and for the people to sing joyful praises to him? So during Rosh Hashanah and during Yom Kippur, the Jewish people believe, from Talmudic sources, it's not in the Old Testament documents, it's not in the Torah, but they believe culturally, they believe from the Talmud, that that's when God is judging them. So during that period, the Hallel is not said. The Hallel is said in 2 forms, in the full and the partial. The full Hallel is all 6 in their entirety. In the partial Hallel does not include verses 1 through 11 of Psalm 115, nor the verses from 116. Well, so that's a good segue. Let's look at 116. Why might they not say 116? When I say it, they don't say it. They don't say the partial. They don't say it. Let's see. When is 116 not said? Recited on the last days of Pesach, Rosh Chodesh. Partial is on Rosh Chodesh because it's introduced much later than other rabbinic festivals. It's late Talmudic times. So it's a custom. Let's see. Not in Purim. So let's see what's in 116. Let's look and see what's in 116, and maybe we can make a guess of ourselves why they would exclude 116. Let me see if I can find it here. I was in the right place. Because I didn't change it should be right here. All right. Verse 1. See if you can get this right away. I, Ahab, Jehovah, Yahweh. I, Ahab, Jehovah. Have we got a problem with that?
Human love for a God.
Oh yeah. This is big deal. This is like in Greek. If I said I phileo God, is there a problem?
You would be stoned for blasphemy.
Yeah. Because in actual, let's put it this way, okay? Maybe Greek is not the best example, and I shouldn't lead you astray. Because remember, in agape is the love of the gods, right? And humans can't have agape. Only the gods can have agape. Phileo is the love that men can have. And basically the love, men have love for other humans. Theoretically, I guess you could have phileo for God. And that's why, in John, remember when Jesus said, "Do you agape me?" And Peter's response is, "I phileo you." Now, that's interesting in itself, right? Because in Greek, you wouldn't use the word phileo for God. Right? In Greek, do you love the gods? No. Those people, would you love those people? No. They're terrible. The best you're going to get from the Greek gods is, well, you're going to die. You know, in a horrible way. I'm not going to let you die in a horrible way. That's probably the most positive you'll get, right? But otherwise, you're like Achilles. Hey, you know, you're going to really die in a horrible fashion. And they're going to drag your body around. It's, you know, in the Greek sense, you don't love the gods. You propitiate them. Right? Now, no. Culturally, there's no word in Hebrew for love. But I got a word here that means, you know this word, what does this word mean? Basically, affection, sexual affection, affection. In the Hebrew, this fills all those words. Remember in Greek, we got phileo and storge and epithumia, and, you know, I've got all these words that I can pick to tell you exactly how I love you.
But it's a word that can be used against another man, not against a God.
That's right.
Because you're calling him a brother, a man. Or you're raising yourself up to God level.
This is interesting, isn't it? I got a psalm, and this is Hallel. So I got a psalm that actually says, I have human affection for Jehovah.
Well, what other word can you use though? Because you can only use ahab for your, I mean, you can't use the other one to describe how your feelings, because that's God's. So what other word are you going to use though?
Well, we're going to see, if we have seen, and I have to get your memory, but we're going to see there's a whole, you know, the basic words that they use for that are Hallel, right? Hallel. We also have Yahab, which means to present an open hand. And we also have Barak, which means to bow. So what we have seen in the Hallel is basically the words that are used for affection, you know. Okay. Do you guys see this? All right. In the ancient worldview, do you have affection for God or gods?
No.
No.
You just try to keep them happy.
Yeah, because if you don't keep them happy, your kid's going to die. If you don't keep them happy, you're going to die. If you don't keep them happy, the crops will fail, right? This is a new idea here. This is not your normal kind of thing. Remember, you know, I started this class, I said, okay, each of the Psalms is an independent kind of thing. It's a independent thought. It's an independent... Boy, you're talking independent here. This is stuck right in the middle of the Hallel, and I love God. You know, to us, all right, we're an I culture, right? We're too much of an I culture. Do you say I in Hebrew? Do you say ego eimi in Greek? Right? Because in ancient cultures, you don't, you know, that's just something you didn't do. But what I have here is I have an ahab, human affection for God. And the words that we've seen used, and we will see used, in the 118th Psalm, when we get to that, we're going to see over and over the word open hand. Open hand, open hand. Before this, we've seen Barak. Remember the beginning of the Psalm, I think the 114th Psalm? I will Barak. And, you know, it was retranslated to worship. And it means to what? Fall on your face. Isn't that interesting? Why don't you change a word that means fall on your face to worship? But in any case, you know, your question's great because, you know, we've seen other words that are less personal. Personal. I mean, all right. Adam, what Eve? Knew Eve. Did he ahab Eve? You think you'd have some kind of sexual affection for her, right?
Got accustomed to her face.
I guess. I mean, he's the only one around for a while there, I guess. But, you know,